This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to delve into fast-approaching future of drones in travel. Unmanned aircraft systems, or unmanned aerial vehicles, are being used to capture stunning vistas and explore the world as never before. But that's also creating challenges and new rules every explorer should know about. Earl Lawrence is the executive director of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office at the Federal Aviation Administration. He joins us today from FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Earl, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
So in October, we covered the FAA's announcement that it was banning drones from flying over some of the most famous landmarks in the U.S., including the Statue of Liberty, Hoover Dam, Mount Rushmore, and more. And the agency said it was at the request of U.S. national security and law enforcement agencies. So please tell our listeners, what do they need to know about today about flying drones while they're exploring some of the beautiful lands in the United States?
Well, great. Thanks for that question. And it's really important as people come to the United States or visiting anywhere in the States using their drones, trying to get those beautiful pictures that they take home. There's a couple of things just to be aware of. You are sharing the airspace with other users. Even though it may not seem like it, especially at the low level, there are lots of people who are operating at a low level. And you are responsible for flying safely. And what's really useful for any visitor is to take advantage of our Before You Fly app, which you can download onto your phone. And that allows a person to check where they are. It knows your location, and it will tell you whether you can fly in that particular location or there is another restriction.
And that app is free, correct?
Absolutely, it is. In a way, the U.S. taxpayers had paid for it. But it is now available to ensure that everybody flies safely and understands what they need to do. As you mentioned, stay away from Washington D.C. Operations in the nation's capital. That's the same if you're in Paris. It's a similar flight restrictions. So that's not an unusual situation around the world as you travel. A lot of the nation's capitals are restricted to any flying, not just drone flying.
Talking about the crowded skies in the FAA's new aerospace forecast released in March, the agency had predicted that the number of drones in the U.S. will more than double within just 5 years to more than 2.4 million units in the UAS fleet. So, Earl, tell us what's coming next in the FAA's proposals for regulations of drones. I know a lot of people are wondering.
Yeah, so our number one focus right now isn't so much an actual regulation as much as working closely with state, local, and tribal authorities on how we're interacting in those communities. So we're working with what's called our implementation pilot program. That was a presidential order, and we're working with states and cities and figuring out how to operate in those communities and how are we going to interact. Do you not operate at night? What's the rules of the road? Should you not operate in a park in certain hours? Should we stay away from parades? These are all the different things that we're looking at. What's appropriate behavior in the local communities? And then we're also rolling out what we call our nationwide low altitude authorization and notification capability, which is another app that's available to people where you can get almost instantaneous approval to fly in these many areas that are generally restricted, but you can apply literally in seconds, receive an approval and a knowledge that you can fly to a certain altitude in those areas. And then we're moving on to also having identification requirements. We're trying to stay away from what we call anonymous operations. It's just like when you drive down the road, you have a license plate on your car. So police and others can follow up on suspicious activity. And that's really what we're looking at here, letting yourself be known that people can follow up. And the primary reason is when there's an emergency or something happening, a first responder, often the fire department, wants to be able to come up, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, can you move over? We have this operation coming in, or we have this concern. And sometimes it's to help them look for something. So Again, it's really about that community engagement, and that's really what's next.
Well, this came up actually at the UAS symposium in Baltimore that was held recently. One of those sessions I noticed was called Forecasting and Emerging Markets, Looking in the Crystal Ball. So, Earl, you're known there at the FAA as the drone guy or the drone king. So do us a favor, look into your crystal ball for us. What do you think we're going to see 5 or 10 years from now that will affect how we use drones in our travels?
I think drones in our travels is going to change dramatically. I like to. Here's a vision. We don't know whether it's really going to happen, but think of this: a drone is almost a flying smartphone. In essence, it has cameras, it's got the internet, it has all these kind of things. Think about having something that can follow you around now and document your trip. It can assist you with knowing what sites to go see and what places to have. That's your connection to the internet. It's your Siri that travels around with you. So these are the kind of things that are being envisioned for the future. We don't know exactly what we're going to have, but you can just imagine the amount of data and information you can have. And you don't need to have a pocket for it, and you don't need to carry it around, which would be great for those who like the beach and the outdoors, et cetera, that it can transport itself along with you.
Well, we might have to check back with you then in 5 or 10 years to find out exactly how it all shaked out. Now, in your role as executive director of the UAS Integration Office there at the FAA, you have to consider how best to weave drone use into all these crowded skies we've already mentioned. What are the biggest challenges that you face right now, Earl?
The biggest challenge we have right now is getting everybody to understand who has gone to the local store and bought a consumer drone to understand that they're part of a national airspace system, even though they may not realize it, and that their actions do affect the safety of others. And so it doesn't have to be real complicated. It's just one of those things that aviation is based on everybody participating and building a safety culture. And we're really counting on everybody continuing and building that safety culture among these new operators and being aware of the surroundings. So it's just like now we don't think anything of it. We get in a car and you put a seatbelt on, it's automatic. Those are the kind of new culture and behaviors that we're looking to build among drone operators who automatically think about, what's the effect of others when I'm operating here? Am I anywhere near an airport? Am I operating right over a family next to me? Just being considerate and thinking these things. And these are really human behaviors, and we're looking to everybody to just be conscious about what they're, where they're flying and how they're flying, and of the others in that area.
So, Earl, I know you're a busy guy and you get a lot of speaking invites and engagements. We noticed that you were at Aero Club DC on March 27th, 2018, and you said something to the audience that really struck us, and we wanted to ask you to expand on it a little bit. You told the audience that, quote, recognizing that we have moved beyond the remote pilot stage and are now in the automation era. The automation era. Explain what you meant, please.
Absolutely. It's an exciting thing. When you say remote flying, that picture of the old days where people had model airplanes and they had a controller and you had to learn how to fly. You have a stick that moves it up and down and turns it left and right. And there's a lot of skills to do this. We have moved beyond that, where these things are gyro stabilized. They take care of themselves. They often know some of the rules. So now you don't have to be an expert pilot to fly these things. You have to be an expert decision maker to understand how you're using it, because the aircrafts fly themselves. They will be stable. They won't fly off. They'll stay near you. But now we have a different set of problems. How do we use these things? What's the proper etiquette in using these machines? It's not so much how do we physically move them up and down and left and right, because the computers will help us ensure that we meet that safety.
And you just mentioned safety. It's a perfect segue to my next question. In July of last year, we had reported that an organization representing 38,000 pilots, the European Cockpit Association, had called for, quote, urgent action after some of their drone collision tests showed that there would be catastrophic results to commercial airplanes and helicopters in a collision with a drone. How does the FAA view this? Is there any danger, do you think, today in the U.S. for these catastrophic drone aircraft collisions involving planes that may have hundreds of travelers aboard?
Well, absolutely. The drones are aircraft, and we don't want aircraft colliding with other aircraft, period. That's never a good thing. So our goal is always to avoid aircraft collisions, and that's what we're trying to do. So when we talk about remember you're operating in airspace that's shared airspace and how you're operating, and be very conscious of your operations. Know your machine. This is why we say it's so critical. You may think you're operating in a remote area and you're looking at, I'm fine, but you may operate your aircraft just a little bit further away from your control station than you had planned, and it flies off someplace. You don't know where that's flying. That could be a danger to somebody else up there, and we just don't want aircraft colliding with aircraft, regardless of the size or what the end result may be. It's important to avoid those types of situations. And, we had one of those in the New York area earlier this year where a hobbyist was flying a DJI aircraft, and he moved it away further than he could see the aircraft, and it collided with a helicopter. It was a military helicopter, but it was on a UN mission, and did significant damage. Luckily, nobody was physically hurt. But that could have been a very catastrophic event. So it goes back to be careful with what you're doing. Keep it within visual line of sight. When you see other aircraft coming in your area, land your aircraft, move it out of the way, and we can all enjoy the skies together and get great pictures and do all the fun things that we're doing with these, get a new aspect from that third dimension. Just be conscious of safety and keep it close to home.
Well, Earl, you use the word hobbyist, and that's it. I mean, most people think of flying a drone as a hobby, but what you're saying is that you sort of have this object in the air which could become dangerous. It's more than just a hobby.
Well, like any hobbies, for some people, riding a motorcycle is a hobby, but that's an activity you have to take very seriously, that you put on safety equipment, you put on a helmet, you take it every time that you operate that machine is a serious event, and you put on safety gear and you pay attention to what you're doing because you want to be safe. You want to protect yourself and you want to protect others. That's the kind of behavior we're looking for. People, as they're doing these things for fun and taking pictures, just realize there's safety measures here as well. And it starts with, again, download your app, check where you're operating, make sure it's a safe place, that there aren't other aircraft in the way.
So, Earl, I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick, if you don't mind. Do you own a drone?
I do not own a drone at this point, other than toy drones. So I don't have one of these major ones with a big camera on it right now.
But I thought the drone guy might have this collection in his basement of maybe 15 or 20, all pumped out with all the greatest technology. I'm kind of disappointed here, Earl.
Yeah, well, we do have a collection here at FAA. So my office has a nice collection of them. But yes, I fly myself and I fly other aircraft, and there's only so many hobbies we can all have. Isn't that true? So.
Absolutely. Now I want to go back to something we mentioned off the top here, the FAA's announcement late last year that it was banning drones from some of these landmarks. I think there were 10 landmarks at the time. Do you expect to expand that list this year?
Again, whether that list expands as far as what locations are declared as a national security risk are something that is not an FAA plan. This is submitted to us by other U.S. government agencies. They're ones that have law enforcement responsibilities, and they provide us with information. They have to provide a justification that it warrants a national security limitation. I'm not aware of any pending ones right now, but of course those change over time, and those agencies will make their own decisions and may have applications in the future. That's why it's always important to check the system and see if there's any restrictions in place. For example, the president could be visiting the same city you're coming to, and that's something you would certainly want to know. And that's where that Before You Fly app is available to you. And I didn't mention it before, and I can't leave without saying it. Even if you're coming from outside the country, you can register outside the country. Register yourself as a hobby drone operator, and you can do that right online. It's simple. There's some simple instructions there. It gives you other links and connections to get those apps and other safety information, and it'll help you enjoy your hobby, your sport, and get the great pictures you're looking for without having to interact with any additional law enforcement, which is not part of any of our vacations.
That's right. And Earl, because we do have readers and listeners across the globe, let me just dive down into that a little bit. You're talking about going to FAA.gov and registering a drone. If you're a foreign citizen coming to the U.S., bringing a drone, you're saying go to the FAA website and register in advance.
Yes, absolutely. And it's and your registration will be downloadable. It can be a PDF. It can be carried in your cell phone or whatever smart device you have. So you don't even have to carry paper with you.
And for registrations for U.S. citizens, the FAA began asking drone operators to do this, I think, maybe 18 months ago or so. How is that coming along with compliance?
Well, I mean, we can always debate compliance. All I can say is we have well over 1 million people who have registered their aircraft as a hobbyist, and we have over 100,000 people who are commercial operators who are registered individual aircraft as commercial. So we see lots of participation in the program, and we think it's been quite successful. And we see behavior for those who are registered improving safety overall, because these obviously are the people who take the time to read the instructions, to check the safety information, and operate safely.
And if I think back to your aerospace forecast that the FAA just released, I think the current number of drones isn't too much higher than 1 million that you estimate, so that seems to be a pretty high compliance rate.
It appears to be, but again, I don't like saying I know the answer for sure, because, again, we don't know how many are sold. We don't know every single one that's been sold or how people are operating them. And particularly in the hobbyist area, because we don't register them by aircraft. You register yourself as a hobbyist operator, and you use your same number and on every aircraft you own. So you could have 15 drones if you're only using them for fun flying and you're not using them commercially for hire. You can use your same registration number on every one of the drones that you own.
Listeners, you can follow the FAA's latest decisions on drones on Twitter at FAA News, on Facebook and YouTube at Federal Aviation Administration, and on Instagram at FAA. Earl Lawrence is the Executive Director of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office, or the Drone Guy, at the FAA. Earl, thanks very much for your time. We sure appreciate you sharing your insight and a little bit of a insight into the future of drone flight with our listeners.
It's been a pleasure.
Listeners, do you use drones when you travel? What do you think of the new FAA rules? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.